Welcome to SF Liberal Buzz, San Francisco Liberal Buzz. There's liberals and there's San Francisco liberals. So this is my guest, Brent Turner. He's a civil rights activist, and he does things his way. And this is my civil rights activism. And we're going to talk about one of the basic civil rights we have in this country are voting. If you've ever lived in countries where you don't have much voting power, you appreciate the power you do here, even though it seems convoluted. And there's ways to suppress front-end voting, which is, busting Acorn, and I suppose other ways were making voters wait in line till 2 in the morning and having one voter booth and one bathroom. That's another way. Or poll tax. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the voting from the back end voting, and it's about the software and the software monopoly on our voting rights, really. And to keep voting democratic, you have to keep it public, for a public source for the code of the software that's being peddled at very high prices to counties, and the election officials have to get a grip on this, around, and who's got the money. So they've got people where they want them, and it's making it really difficult. So I'd like you to talk about Harvey Milk and Amiano. We'll start at the beginning. How about that? Because voting is compulsory in Australia. So, will voting systems adopt open source? And, talk about open source voting some.
Well, at the beginning, I should say a lot of this work comes from the sustainability activist community. The work really centered in the early days around UC Berkeley, a fellow by the name of Henry Brady, and he was working with Alan Deckert, and they moved the needle quite a bit and designed. Alan Deckert from Open Voting Consortium designed some good systems that now we are seeing pop up as designs in Los Angeles County. So they're still state of the art, and that's what's called an open source ballot printing system. But that was in the early 2000s. And since I got on board around 2004, when we were really seeing the outflow of HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, which put $4.5 billion of public money toward the vendors to provide the electronic voting systems. So my activism around San Francisco has been going on now for about 10 years. And as you mentioned, Raphael Mendelman and Tom Amiano and Chris Daly were some of the early adopters in San Francisco County for the notion that the system should be publicly owned and the software should be viewable by the public to make sure that it's operating properly. And so that is some of the beginnings. Supervisor Amiano at that time put together the Voting Systems Task Force for San Francisco County, and that work has turned out to be valuable in announcing a lot of the concepts that have continued to be validated time and time again. And as a matter of fact, we just saw a few days back the United States House of Representatives has now gone toward open source systems for their internal use.
As has Obama.
The president, who I am proud to say I was with on day one of his campaign, when he was then senator, I briefed him regarding open source software, and I think it was new information for him. So to see it come from that point to him calling for the government to move toward consideration of open source contracts is really a great thing. And now, of course, we believe our next step is to have open source voting systems, as that is really the most gravity-filled situation that we have for government.
So the software. Now let's get back to with the software having very, very difficult codes that where you need a whole room full of software engineers. Even if they do hand you the codes,
Yes.
it'll take a whole room full of software engineers. It kind of reminds me of how the banking system was with their lending practices and making it so complicated that no one could understand it. It's one of those. Is it that?
Well,
Is that what
certainly, complication is an element to wise guy behavior. So anytime anything gets overly complicated and the general public can't understand it, I believe it's problematic. But the current code is, yes, overly voluminous, and the fact is, the current vendors would be hard pressed to disclose it. They have not done that. What they have done, one company, ES&S, and some others, but one company in particular, ES&S, put their code in escrow with the Secretary of State, and then come to find out in real estate, I own a green real estate company, an escrow is good. In elections, an escrow is not good when it comes to software because ES&S was caught with different code in the field on the machines, a different code that was in the escrow account. So then Secretary of State Deborah Bowen fined them pretty heavy, but of course,
didn't she kind of turn away from that and stop talking about it? And so she's basically, well, Deborah Bowen. Now she's a public official that when she stopped talking about it after making open source her platform, and what did she drink, the Kool-Aid or something?
Well, I think all we know is for sure she went silent on the issue after campaigning, using it initially as part of her platform, and at that point, she, I think, we know she had some other personal issues that got in the way of her tenure there. But regardless, the end result was we didn't see a lot of forward motion during her stint as Secretary of State. But luckily now we have a Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, who authored a bill, SB 360, which is very important to us as it lays a foundation for the kind of systems we prescribe, prescribe, I should say, the kind of systems we advocate to come into effect, and that's what's called a general public license, open source voting system.
Right, and that won't take a whole room full of software engineers to figure it out.
No, the amount of code is greatly lessened, and it's a lot more elegant. So that if you put it out for viewing, it would be understandable. And the idea is, if there was something amiss with the code, it would be noticeable. Which currently, you would never know if there was a bug or something wrong with the code.
Like in the 2004 election, just sends shivers down my spine.
Well, we certainly went to bed thinking we had one president and woke up with another.
And so twice.
Yeah. So we don't want to ever see that again. And we want a nice, clean, concise election with sturdy results. And with the current systems, of course, you cannot achieve that. And if somebody tells you that you can, that's a liar.
Yeah, they're trying to sell you something.
Yes.
So they have now San Francisco would be the first county to actually have open source voting the way it should be. I mean, there was talk about Los Angeles and Texas, somewhere in Texas, having it as well, but there's something dodgy about the codes not being accessible enough, or what's wrong with their systems?
Well, they're announcing that they're moving toward open source systems in Travis County, Texas, and in Los Angeles County. Los Angeles is an unusual county because they have their HAVA money that I talked about at their disposal. So they've been looked at for leadership on this. We're not waiting for them. The fact is, their lack of announcing general public license as their open source software gives us pause for concern, cause for concern. And so we and Travis County, Texas, has got Microsoft as a partner on their project. So we're not, optimistic about the chances of them taking the high road. In San Francisco, we have a good board of supervisors. They're very smart on this issue.
They're going to hear are they going to hear it?
They are. Scott Wiener, Supervisor Wiener, has decided that this is an issue he's interested in, and we feel like that's a very strong position, as we may be in good position toward the overall board.
Well, he wants to be senator.
I think it's smart, and I think that politicians that get on the right side of this issue will do well, and those that hesitate and don't grasp the issue properly will find history judges them poorly, because, of course, when you're talking about the keystone of democracy, we want transparency, and this is probably the most intense transparency issue, I think, out there right now.
Voting rights.
Yes.
Yes. We've got our voting rights are being threatened through gerrymandering and district redrawing. That's why we can't get the House. We can't ever win the House unless they stop gerrymandering the districts. And let's talk about open washing. We've got 11 minutes. Beware of nuanced open source advocates who don't meet the standards of an open sourcing. We just talked about that in Scott Wiener. Now, how about let's talk about.
Well, just to clarify, Scott Wiener certainly doesn't fall into that category. What that really is addressing is those who are trying to log jam by by advocating a software code that flies the flag of open source but doesn't meet the standard. So that's why I keep referencing general public license, because that is the high ground for open source and beyond reproach. Convoluting the conversation with licensing issues is a common tactic of those people that want to blockade this, and we often consider them to be part and parcel to the Microsoft intellectual property lobbyist effort.
Oracle too.
Oracle is, anybody that's selling intellectual property software, proprietary software, does not enjoy open source, as it is publicly owned, free, and it happens to be a much higher grade than what they're selling. The Air Force, the DoD, they're all using open source because it's more robust, and you could spot issues, whereas, as I mentioned, Microsoft is a cluster.
So, we've had hackers lately from other countries try to, I suppose it's been in the news somewhat. Now, when does this go before the Board of Supervisors?
It's coming up sooner rather than later. I think it'll be coming up. I'm not sure on the exact date, but it may be in the next month or two. We just saw the first draft of the LAFCO report, which, in my opinion, was favorable toward the use of open source. Fairly non-committal, more of a fact-finding piece, but it's okay, because I think the interpretation will be right by the board, and they'll read it and understand it. Again, I think they're smart on this, and I think they'll be talking with the Secretary of State, who advocates this as well. So,
well, it's too cost prohibitive for counties to update their machines too. Their voter machines. They can't afford to upgrade from the 2004 ones we've still got.
That's right.
Aren't most of those machines across the country are from 2004, where John Kerry kind of got screwed over.
That's exactly correct. It turns out that cost is a big driving factor for our work, whereas, of course, we come from the security community, and we've been preaching better security. But the reality is now the entire country, all 3,000 plus jurisdictions, find themselves in the predicament of not enough money to buy the next round of systems. So all of a sudden, our solution is looking like a pretty darn good alternative.
Yeah, it is. Now, to publicize it, where would the funds come from? Would we have to pool monies for all the counties involved, pool their money and get maybe off-the-shelf hardware,
yes,
and then have the open source which is the code, which is easier than the complicated codes anyway. You don't have to pay for it, so that'll cut costs right there.
That's exactly correct, and uh, I think you explained it well. The idea is that if the counties don't get relief from up above, either the feds or the state, and that would be great as well. But if worst case scenario, they have to just pool their own resources, that should be done. And certainly, it's a good idea to invest in themselves for them and to escape the current vendor trap, which they have to buy these new systems fairly consistently. So that would alleviate all that mess.
What makes me happy is we do this through the local counties, and we don't have to go through the House of Representatives. That's so gerrymandered. They're they're like
Right.
yeah.
Well, this is falling into a nonpartisan, good for everyone situation, and I think it's being recognized now, especially with the president Obama making public statement that open source is the way to go. Many other countries are ahead of us on this, so it's really up to us
Such
now. Brazil,
Okay.
Italy, many, and so we're seeing a movement now, but it really, for voting machines, it starts on the local county level, and California tends to lead. So it's really incumbent on San Francisco to move this forward, as I think I know we have the brain power here and a very strong open source community that other counties in the state do not have at their disposal. So it's looking like San Francisco can really stand up and take the lead, but it is a matter of political will.
How do we make it a uniform policy to have open source everywhere?
I think once San Francisco steps up and does it, and the Secretary of State gets a system certified and uses San Francisco as the proving ground, at that point it will domino, because the other counties that have been waiting for relief will recognize it and then adopt.
Sort of like the Affordable Care Act. Hopefully, will go.
Mm-hmm.
They'll just start adopting, because I can see it going down the same lines as the Affordable Care Act. Because the GOP seems to just. I don't think there's going to be some of them that aren't going to like this. I just have that feeling.
Interesting you should say that. Darrell Issa, believe it or not, was an adopter of this, putting open source in the House of Representatives. And believe it or not, I've briefed him as well, and he seems to have a feel for transparency. So you just never know who's going to really understand transparency and have that sort of Uncle Sam gene where they think that there should be a proper vote count. Because the game of who can rig it better, it might not be to anybody's liking.
And it's an election year, so they're going to want to impress their voting base a lot, because a lot of people want fair voting, and that's a good way of getting it implemented in more places. Maybe not in 2016, but in 2020.
It very well could be. We don't. Anytime anybody wants to help us advocate for better elections, we accept that and appreciate it. And it's a work in progress, like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. But we're seeing movement now, and we're excited. We think it's the time for this.
So now we've also got Citizens United to worry about stealing our election. So it's really there's a lot stacked against voting liberals. There really is.
Mm-hmm.
The Citizens United, that I don't know, that doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. But this has got to help a little.
Well, the Clean Money campaign, of course, is our sister campaign.
Yeah.
And so, we feel they go hand in hand as far as cleaning up elections go. And, we've remained focused on this issue of getting a proper vote count, and then a lot of us will move on to the clean money issue.
Let's talk about Hillary's attorneys working for Microsoft, and maybe some of Obama's attorneys working for Microsoft as well.
There's a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats out there, and so that makes our work even more difficult. But I did have a good conversation with Ann O'Leary, who is Hillary's chief advisor, one of her senior advisors, and she happens to come out of the district attorney's office here the city attorney's office in San Francisco. And so she's been watching this work for a long time, and our hope is that Hillary is briefed well on this, as well as all presidential candidates should be familiar with this issue so that no matter who wins, we implement this sooner rather than later.
Excellent. And one way to do that is to contact your local supervisors so you all can get involved. And contact your supervisor, whatever district you're in. Go to the sfgov.org website, and you can tell them that you favor open source because they're going to vote on it. And they vote on Tuesdays. You can also go down to City Hall around 1 o'clock in the afternoon and give public comment about it, about open source to them. It doesn't, the general public comment, which usually you don't have to wait that long
Yes.
for it.
The Elections Commission,
Yeah.
also the LAFCO, they're all involved in this. And so any support we can get from the public, this usually isn't an issue that brings out a lot of people to give their opinion.
It's
but
not
we would
a wedge issue, is it?
No, we would appreciate it if people
It's
showed up.
bipartisan, so you'd like to say it's a bipartisan issue.
I call it nonpartisan.
Nonpartisan.
Yeah, nonpartisan. I mean, anybody that from all parties, everybody should want a fair vote count.
Absolutely, and I want to thank you for
Thank
all
you
your
very
work,
much.
everything
Thank you for
do.
yours.
And I really appreciate it. Now I've got 30 seconds left to ask you to please adopt a shelter pet. Check out our next show on, I guess it's July the 16th. We'll be here. I'll try to get Aaron Peskin in here. I don't know. And also next, watch Psychic Frank's show. That's every second and fourth Thursday at 5 p.m. I appreciate you watching my show. And Let's Talk Sports is coming up next. Check them out. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Denise.
Oh, thank you.